Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Jeff Morton, your host for Let's Talk About It. As you can see, I am joined with several very special people. I have Dr. Thomas Siler joining us, Dr. Richard Eggleston, and of course, Todd Richardson. I keep saying Richardson, who is the attorney representing these two gentlemen. And we're having some technical problems. That's why we came out a little late. And I see that Todd is kind of gone again, so hopefully we can get him back. But Dr. Siler, while we're waiting for them to come back in,
Sure.
Let's go ahead and start the show with you. Can you go ahead and just tell the audience about 5 minutes about who you are and how long you've been practicing? And we'll get Todd back here in a minute, but I'll let you go ahead and start off the show.
Sure. Do you want me to carry on if they're back, or are we good? Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Yeah.
They'll figure it out.
All right. I'm an internal medicine doctor. I've been living in the Pacific Northwest, about 30 years with my wife and family. I've had a variety of practices out here, most around Tacoma area. I did general internal medicine. That's just a doctor for adults who takes any kind of problems. Graduated from University of Tennessee, and then I did my training in Alabama, Birmingham. Then we moved out here with our family, as I said, about 30 years ago. So my entrance into the problem that we are talking about today is I had already planned to retire after about 35 years at the end of 2020 or the start of 21, right there, January 21 is when I had planned to retire. And the pandemic started about 9 months before that. The official start was March 2020. And so I was looking forward to retirement. And I had always thought about what I was going to do in retirement. And one thing that I had been interested in doing was writing. Both my parents were journalists as I grew up, and I didn't have time to write when I was practicing, but I wanted to see if I could put words to the page and begin writing some as I retired. So, of course, the pandemic was on everybody's hearts and minds at that point in time. And I was going through part of it there for the first 9 months before I retired. And then in the start of 2021, I began writing about different aspects of the pandemic and its management and things like that. And I was...
Go ahead and hold that thought.
Okay.
Because we're going to talk a lot about that. I want to bring in Dr. Eggleston and Attorney Todd Richardson. Gentlemen, I know we're having a little technical problem, but we're going to keep moving through and just keep going out. But since we started with Dr. Siler, Dr. Eggleston, would you go ahead and just give us a short synopsis of your career, and then we'll get into why we're all here today.
Well, interestingly, I am going to be 85 this year in July, and I practiced as an ophthalmologist until about 2014. And after going to medical school at the University of Kansas and interning with the U.S. Army at Letterman Hospital in San Francisco, I was then a flight surgeon for the Army in Italy initially. And then when the field closed, was transferred to the Medical Command headquarters in Heidelberg, Germany, where I was the assistant flight surgeon for the U.S. Army in Germany. Then I did my ophthalmology residency back at the University of Kansas, and then moved to Spokane, Washington in November of '74. I had practiced there until 1986 when we moved down to Clarkston, Washington. While the time in Spokane, I was chief of staff at the Valley Hospital. And then when we moved down to Clarkston, I became also chief of staff at the Valley Hospital. And during that time, I was also on the medical commission as a ad hoc ophthalmologist for ophthalmology cases. But I was on there for 2 3-year terms. And so I have experience of what the commission does and what they're supposed to do and their commission that their job to do. And we can talk about that later. Then I moved down to Clarkston, Washington, as I said, in about '86 and practiced till about 2013. My son joined me in the practice in 2001, and he's running it now, along with a very competent ophthalmologist too that joined him. So about 4 years ago, because I read and studied all the time, the local newspaper, the Lewiston Tribune, had a request for conservative writers to join their staff. And I had written many letters to the editor and had one particular piece talking about the two candidates in the 2016 election, and didn't mention their names, just outlined what their positions were. And the paper accepted me to write, and I've been writing for 4 years. Apparently, I'm going to be ending in June of this year because my term has expired. But during that time, we have covered many topics. The first year was a lot about COVID and what to do and why it was happening and the problems with it. And lately, and many other, I talked about many other things during that time also. But as I mentioned earlier, I knew that when I started to write these things that somebody was going to complain to the commission, and I was prepared for that and accepted it, and it didn't bother me a bit. And some after my first article, or the second article actually, some of the local docs in town wrote a reply to the paper saying that I was wrong, and that was fine with me. I didn't have any problem with them stating an opinion that my viewpoints were wrong. They did not call for me to be delicensed or anything. They just said I was wrong, and what they have written has proved to be wrong. What I have written over the years has proven to be right. Every issue that the commission has accused me of has been proven to been accurate in my viewpoint, or for my viewpoint. So we're now at the point where we're in the legal issues, and Todd can talk about that.
Good. Thank you, gentlemen, for bringing us up to date. And I appreciate the fact that you guys have been serving the communities for as long as you have. Todd, this is Attorney Todd Richardson. He and I have been talking about his role in this case for, about 8 months now. And now we finally have him on the podcast. Todd, why are we here?
Well, Jeff, really, we're here for a number of reasons, but it really comes down to the United States Constitution. And the question that we're facing is, at this moment, the Washington State Medical Commission has made a decision that they need to prosecute doctors who speak out. The Medical Commission has taken an official policy, an official position, that when a person puts out any writing, and whether it be a book, a advertisement, an opinion article, as these great doctors have put out, anything they put out, if they list they are a doctor, an MD, a DO, a physician, a surgeon, anything that says that they are a medical practitioner who could be licensed by the state, that the medical commission then has the right to come in and evaluate that. And if the medical commission disagrees with that, to censor them. In this case, Dr. Eggleston came first, and so he had his articles that were going out, as he mentioned, periodically. And there was a gentleman from the state of Idaho who took offense at it. And this gentleman wrote to the medical commission 3 separate times saying, this doctor needs to lose his license. How dare he say those things about COVID? Well, the medical commission then contacted Dr. Eggleston and said, hey, you want to defend yourself on this? And Doc, having had experience with the medical commission, initially started talking to them, and then he came to me. And we've been in litigation with them since. We'll get into that litigation in a minute. But while that was going on, then Dr. Siler, he started writing for American Thinker. And again, managed to publish that he was a doctor. And there were 2 doctors, one out of Kentucky and one out of New Jersey, who complained about Dr. Siler's articles. And because of those 2 complaints, the Washington Medical Commission started prosecuting Dr. Siler. So in both cases, the Medical Commission decided that, no, because you are a doctor, because you admit you're a doctor, that is now what we call professional speech. And because it is professional speech, we get to control it, and we get to decide what you're going to be able to say and not say. And because both of you said something that we disagree with, we are now going to come and prosecute you with the threat of and the intent of taking away their medical license. Now, both these doctors, they've already told you they are retired. Neither one of them were treating a single person. Neither one of them were in a position where they violated a client's confidence or they violated a standard of care. Instead, they voiced an opinion in a public forum. And the Washington State Medical Commission said, that's enough. Now we can prosecute. And so here we are.
So now, my reading on the Washington Medical Commission, this isn't even their role to get involved in this kind of thing. So I was a little confused as to how they jumped over their own bylaws to prosecute these two doctors. It didn't make sense to me. I've been trying to figure that out now for several months as I read through the cases. Can you help me understand that?
You bet. The Washington State statutes that control and give authority to the medical commission have enumerated items that they can sanction a doctor for doing. And some of the things that they can sanction a doctors for are for dishonesty. And so if a doctor, in fact, history has shown that doctors who, for example, commit tax fraud, they will be sanctioned by the commission for acts of dishonesty. Another one that they can sanction them for is for moral turpitude. Well, in this case, the commission, in their headlong rush to defend their position on COVID, they have decided that by making professional speech, and I keep using that term advisedly, and I'll explain why here in a few minutes, but the reason, because they're using professional speech, now the commission can accuse both of these doctors of dishonesty and moral turpitude because they said something that was, in the commission's opinion, wrong. Now, I find it fascinating because if I were to allow both of these doctors, and I'm not going to allow it because of the stance of the medical, of the legal cases right now, but if I were to allow them to go in and start explaining, each of them made their opinions based on medical studies that they had read. What they were doing was saying, here is what I have read of our medical studies, here's what I think, and here's what other people are doing. And the medical commission says, no, wait a minute, wait, you can't do that because the Federation, the Federation of State Medical Boards had handed down a policy statement they sent out to all of the 50 different state medical commissions and said, we want you to embrace this. We want you to adopt this, and we want you to tell your doctors that this is what they are to promote. And so it all started with an unelected group, a group that nobody in the state of Washington is actually subject to or even has much of a voice on. I can't say no voice because the Washington State Medical Commission has some input back to the Federation of State Medical Commissions. But because that federation stepped in and took this and then pushed it out to the states, most of the states followed lockstep. Now you'll notice that, for example, in Florida, they did not. Their Surgeon General rebutted it, said, no, that's not the case. And Florida has refused to take this position. However, there are a number of states that have actively prosecuted doctors. You may have heard of Dr. Pierre Corey out of California, and he is currently being prosecuted. In fact, he has a case that is running on a parallel track to ours, and we anticipate that it will likely be joined as we go to the U.S. Supreme Court again. We were hoping to have Pierre Corey and a couple others combined with us for our last trip to the Supreme Court. We did not. The posture of the case, what they call the posture, the procedural stance of the case, had not allowed it to get in a position where we could combine them for approach to the U.S. Supreme Court. But really, you say, how do they get there? It's real simple. The simple answer is if you give a bureaucrat an inch, they'll take 10 miles. And that's what happened. In this case, the state legislature gave the bureaucracy a small window, and a window that was proper to watch and make sure that doctors are ethical, to make sure that doctors are honest in their practice, to make sure doctors aren't committing acts of moral turpitude in their practice. And so if a doctor, starts engaging in improper behavior, mistreating patients, if they start lying to patients in that doctor-patient relationship, the medical commission has every right and a duty to help ensure that the medical profession maintains its integrity by policing that. But now they have said, no, we can use that, and we're going to expand that all the way across and deprive doctors of their First Amendment right to speak.
Uh-oh, we lost you again. So Doc, I lost you. Dr. Eggleston, oh, we got you back. Can you hear us?
You're muted.
Doc,
Unmute.
hang on.
There we go.
There you go.
There we go.
All right. So let me back up a little bit, because I recognize from what I've read everything you said. Obviously, we need to have some protection for patients when we've got unscrupulous doctors. But as I read this whole thing, this was a free speech issue of two doctors just simply writing an opposing viewpoint on some of the things that were out there, which there was a lot of that. But Todd, I want to come back to you, because I mean, you're one of the top lawyers and trial lawyers in the country. I've looked at a lot of your information. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get back into the issue that brought us all together today.
Well, Jeff, there's a statement that a lot of attorneys give that kind of to be self-deprecating. It's that, gee, I'm just an old country lawyer, but in truth, that's who I am. I was born and raised in eastern Idaho, and I'm going to back up this far for a reason. Let me get you there real quick. The first person I got to vote for, the first president I ever got to vote for, was Ronald Reagan. And he was elected in 1980, of course. And at that same time, there was a young congressman from Idaho's first district who ran for U.S. Senate. His name was Steve Sims. And Steve became a great senator. Well, my mom happened to get the job of running a 10-county office for Senator Sims. And one day I stopped in the office to say hi to Mom. And she said, hey, would you like to meet the senator? And I said, absolutely, you bet. And so he invited me back into the office. He sat down, he put his boots up on the table, and we had a nice long talk. And through the conversation, he asked a question that was far more intelligent than I was. He said, Todd, what questions do you have for me? And I said, well, I guess first question is, what's the most important thing you think you could do for the United States? And he said, well, that's simple. If I could do one thing to help the United States more than anything, it would be to repeal the 17th Amendment. And he looked at me and he said, Todd, do you know what the 17th Amendment is? A long pause from this young high school kid, and I said, no, I can't say that I do. And so he taught me. And then he said words that changed my life. He said, Todd, read the Constitution, get to know the Constitution, and love the Constitution. Yep. You will need it. And that started a love affair with the Constitution that has guided me to this day. My mom, far more wise than I am, she convinced me to go to law school. And I left eastern Idaho and I went to the University of Idaho. And while I was at University of Idaho, I got involved with the Federalist Society and with the Institute for Justice. And then I had an attorney here in the Lewis-Clark Valley. And when we say Lewis-Clark Valley, if you've heard of Lewis-Clark, the explorers, that's why it's named the Lewis-Clark Valley. Because they came right through here. They stayed with the Nez Perce when the Nez Perce saved their lives in that first winter. Well, the attorney here gave me a job, and I have been working in a small rural area of Idaho and Washington. But somehow, and if you are a person of faith, like I think all of us are, I have to tell you, it's Providence guiding me, because somehow I've ended up with cases in every corner of the state of Washington. I have been in Seattle and Bellingham and down in Vancouver. I've been wall to wall in Spokane. I've been everywhere in between. I've been all over the state of Idaho. I've been down in Utah. And I happened because of a case that I had a friend who came to me one day and he said, hey, listen, I've got the county giving me a hard time. Will you come help me out? And so I started into a case with a young man by the name of Rich Eggleston. And yes, it just happens to be Doc Eggleston's son. Well, Rich and I have been fighting that case for 16 years.
Wow.
And we have beat the county and beat the county and beat the county and beat the county. But because of that, when Doc started having problems with the medical commission, he came to me and again, just by happenstance or by providence, you take your pick. I'd gone to the Jerry Spence Trial Lawyers College in 2009, and I'd become friends with a number of great trial attorneys around America. And one of them had contacted me and said, "Hey, listen, I've got a case against the Washington State Medical Commission. I need a Washington attorney to work with me. Will you help me out?" And so I helped him out. And right in the middle of that, Doc comes to me and says, "Hey, Todd, I got a case with the Washington State Medical Commission. I need an attorney. Can you help me out?" And so I started in on this. And from there, well, I'm going to let Doc tell you a story about how he knows John Stockton, the NBA All-Star. And that opened doors that have just created incredible opportunities for all of us. And so if you don't mind, I'm just going to turn over to Doc for a minute.
Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
One of John's sons, his youngest one, played at Lewis Clark State College, the local college. He played basketball, and I found out that John was coming down, and I had watched a podcast of John in which he was interviewed, and I said, "Man, this guy really knows a lot." So I went to one of the games with the intention of meeting John and giving him the information that I had written, the 12 or 13 articles that I had written by that time. And he doesn't like to talk during the game. He likes to concentrate. So I just left a note on the package say, "John, if you find this interesting, you want to talk about it, here's my phone number and email." So that was on a Friday night. On Sunday, I get a call from John, and I said, "Well, I guess you read it." He says, "Yes, I did. And I really am so happy for it." And so we had about a 40-minute talk getting to know each other. And then since then, we have been in pretty constant contact. But through John, when I told him what was happening, and he put his feeler out to the CHD, which is the Children's Health Defense, which was founded by Robert Kennedy. And he asked if there's any attorney in there that wanted to be involved with this First Amendment issue. And a man named Rick Chaffee responded, and he said, "Well, this is the exact kind of case I've been looking for my entire career, a medical issue that's not involving patients, but just strictly First Amendment rights." And so he has taken that on with the approval of Robert Kennedy, and Robert knows about this, or Bobby, I guess what people call him, because he mentioned it on national TV one day. And just an interesting thing about how Bobby has gotten involved now is that in July of last year, when he was running about 10% in the popularity polls for president, and Kamala was about 2% behind Trump, he made a contact, or tried to make a contact with Harris, saying, I think we ought to talk and maybe we can do something. Well, she refused to do that and actually ridiculed him for the attempt to even contact her. So he got a hold of Donald Trump, and they talked, and now Bobby is running a $1.8 trillion organization for the government, and Kamala's unemployed. And so he is very committed to First Amendment rights, and has written many articles, and I'm so happy to see him in there.
Part of the reason that is so interesting, Jeff, is Bobby agreed with Rick Jaffe to be co-counsel with Rick and I, and to bring a case with Doc Eggleston and Dr. Siler. They bring in Children's Health Defense, and then Dr. Daniel Moynihan, who was also from Washington, and we brought and then John Stockton are the plaintiffs. And we brought a federal lawsuit against the Washington Medical Commission and the Washington Attorney General, trying to stop this prosecution, trying to assert their constitutional rights. And that case was filed in the Eastern District of Washington. And unfortunately, the judge there decided that case wasn't worth hearing, and he dismissed it. We filed an appeal, and it went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And we asked the Ninth Circuit to give an injunction to stop these prosecutions. They refused to do so. And so this is our first trip to the Supreme Court, because we've asked the Supremes if they would please enter that injunction and stop it while we were going through this appeal. Justice Elena Kagan said no. She didn't even give it consideration with other justices. She gave what they call an in-office rejection. Well, there's a rule in the U.S. Supreme Court that allows you to resubmit it. And so we resubmitted. And when we resubmitted, this time we targeted Justice Clarence Thomas. And Justice Thomas said, that's interesting. We're going to grant a temporary stay, and we're going to bring this in front of a conference of the justices. And they held that conference in January. They decided they were not going to grant the injunction, and the case was sent back to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Well, we're now scheduled for oral argument at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and I suspect if we win, The commissions may want to try to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. If we lose, I guarantee you it's going to be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. So the justices may not be rid of us yet.
Well, I mean, before I bring Dr. Siler back in, that's when I saw the case and I'm going, wow, they dismissed it. And then they dismissed it again. And then I saw it was going up before Cagle. I think that's her name.
Kagan.
Anyway, and then it was kicked out and I'm going, and then I saw Clarence Thomas, who I'm a huge fan of. He offered, well, let's listen to this. And then now it went back down to the appellate court. So I'm like, oh my God, what a roller coaster ride. Dr. Siler, I'm going to bring you back in on this because how were you drawn into all of this?
Well, I got notified that I was going to be, I had several complaints against what I wrote, and they scheduled me for a hearing. And I was debating with my wife whether to defend myself or not. And I was also praying about that. And Dr. Eggleston's case was a little bit ahead of mine. So I had read some articles about Dr. Eggleston's case starting in Eastern Washington, and it sounded very similar to my case. So the name of the attorney in the article was Todd Richardson, who I didn't know at all, but I talked online with a few attorneys about defending me. I never got anywhere. And then I called Todd Richardson cold call and just said, hey, let's get acquainted. Here's my situation. Kind of sounds like Dr. Eggleston. What do you think? Can you defend me too? And he said yes. So that's when I signed on. I decided to defend myself, and with my wife's permission, going on to add it together, and that's how we got connected.
Now they were the Washington Medical Commission brought suit against you both, and so you had to now defend yourselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it was because you wrote, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds with this, but because you wrote opposing articles or submitted ideals, or because you basically wrote a few articles and the next thing you know, did you have other medical professionals come against you, or just the average Joe reading the articles? Because I'm very familiar with the American Thinker. I have a couple of friends who write on the American Thinker, and I love the American Thinker.
Yeah.
I'm also a Ronald Reagan protege, so to speak. But in your case, Dr. Stiller, did you have medical professionals speaking against you, or just people who read your articles?
Yeah, they sent me the complaints, but I think one of them had assigned it as a doctor, but they don't tell you, they sent me the complaints, but they don't tell you who the people are exactly. I think Todd knows more about it than I do. They had several complaints. I wrote 8 or 9 articles over the span of a year or 15 months about different aspects of the pandemic and its management and things like that. All of them were in American Thinker. As I was saying, I was trying to learn how to be a writer, so I started there, and I was going to see what happened. But I didn't know who was complaining against me. I still don't know all of them.
Wow, that's incredible to me. That's so un-American.
Yeah, Jeff, one of the issues here is what's going on is the medical commission is using the tattletale rule, if you will, where they try to get other people to complain, and then they will use that to spur a prosecution. And the idea is, if they can use a couple of people like Dr. Siler and Dr. Eggleston and prosecute them, they then can convince other doctors to remain silent. One of the reasons Dr. Moynihan joined our federal case is because he has felt compelled to be silent. There are things that he's wanted to say, but out of fear of protecting his license, he's remained silent. And so when I've told you about the case that went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, what I didn't tell you is we currently have a case going on for Dr. Eggleston in which the Washington State Medical Commission is prosecuting him. We've countersued the Washington State Medical Commission, and our local superior court dismissed the case. We have appealed that to the Washington State Court of Appeals, and there is an injunction from the Court of Appeals stopping the prosecution against Dr. Eggleston, at least while we go through this appeal. With Dr. Siler, right now he's scheduled for a trial at the end of April, of the first part of May, and you can suspect that there may be a lawsuit coming very similar to the one we filed for Dr. Eggleston to try to stop that. Because one of the things about the First Amendment is it is acknowledged by the U.S. Supreme Court that any invasion of that right is a penalty, and it is something you can't restore. So the invasion is the first harm that must be stopped. That initial invasion is the first harm that must be stopped. But it's the one that the medical commission feels like they must succeed with, because if they can get that initial invasion in, then they can contact all of the people in the medical commission, all the doctors, and say, see, we're prosecuting this person, we're prosecuting that person, and they can get what we call, the attorneys call it, the chill wind of censorship to blow across and stop people's use of their First Amendment.
You know, that I remember when they were, doing the mask mandates here in Washington State, and I talked to a lot of people who had lost their jobs, who refused to take the shot. We did the whole religious, I forget what the term was, exemption, and there were lawyers that wouldn't touch this and help these people. Have you experienced that, anyone?
I guess I'll jump in, and you just heard Dr. Siler a few minutes ago say that he contacted a number of different attorneys who wouldn't step in to help him.
Right.
Dr. Eggleston knows of one other attorney who was willing to help him with that. In fact, even helped him with a separate federal case on this, representing some other doctors. But the truth of the matter is, it is somewhat rare, or at least it was. It was more rare than it is now. But it was rare to find attorneys who would be willing to make this a fight. Happened to be my friend from the Jerry Spence Trial Lawyers College. He represents what they call the integrative medicine folks around the nation. There's an integrative medical community that he's the counsel for, their in-house counsel, and he defends them all over the nation. And this is becoming something they talk about at all of their conferences, and they're trying to find more attorneys who will get involved and do that, because it is something that was starting to spread. Is it over? And there are folks who say, oh, well, now that Trump's elected, it's over. No, it's not. In fact, in the last couple of days, there was a vaccine that was just approved for the bird flu, and the vaccine has been approved to give to chickens, and they intend to inoculate or vaccinate every egg-laying chicken in all of the commercial egg producers. And you say, well, certainly somebody can do something about that. Well, it's fascinating, because that happened. The next piece of that puzzle happened on February 14th, and it wasn't until February 17th that Bobby Kennedy became the Secretary of HHS. So they keep trying to get just ahead of the changes that are coming. It's important that we have people like Pam Bondi, who's willing to fight for First Amendment. It's important that we have people like Bobby Kennedy, who has represented both of these fine doctors. And he did have to withdraw because of his role with now in the it's an ethical rule that you're not allowed to practice law when you are have that government position, and so he has had to withdraw from that case. But it's very important that we have people like that in those roles to be able to start to find the protection for these men.
So I'm going to go back to what you just mentioned about, the bird flu vaccination. What people don't understand, and this, I'm hoping that the light has gone on in a few minds around the globe, to be honest. But they're introducing the spike protein. They want to put it in the chickens. They want to put it in your beef. They want to get this vaccination into your bodies. And I think it's sinister. I really think it's sinister. I'm praying that now that we have some common sense folks in office, that we can we can join you in this fight somehow. And we've raised enough voices to where people will go, yeah, stop trying to put this in our bodies. It was astounding to me. And Dr. Eggleston, you said something to me that I hadn't really thought about. You said prior to the COVID, the medical community had the American trust. I had never really thought about it that way, because what I didn't understand was why the medical community abandoned the public and went with whatever was being broadcast on the major networks, on the MSNBCs and the ABCs and the NBCs and the CBSs. And I'm sitting here having studied this, and I followed a whole lot of opposing science on all of this. I couldn't believe that people were actually putting this in their bodies because a news person told them they needed to do this. I just, to this day, I'm befuddled by that.
Well, let me say a couple of things. First, about the medical commission, they do have a valid and good functioning reason for keeping physicians who do wrong medicine or bad medicine from harming the public. But they have overstepped their bounds with this whole thing about First Amendment rights. And to explain why so many docs did this, there were actual monies, like $15 million paid to one of the major OBGYN groups to publicize and to push the vaccines on their pregnant women. And there's one in the pediatric groups that was also paid a lot of money to do this. And so the main organizations, had some financial gain for this. And the more they got the vaccine going into these people, the better it was for them. But there's a lot of people in medicine, just like there's everybody else, who are just followers, and they don't understand the issue to begin with, and then they just listen to people that they feel they can trust. And that's the same thing that's happened with here. And I've said many times before, to different people, there's a history in medicine of outlawing and disrespecting certain doctors that have different ideas. And one of the most famous ones is Agnes Semmelweis, who is a Austrian physician who found out that women who were delivered by midwives had about the 10th of the mortality rate of what's called puerperal fever, in which women died and babies died. And he figured that out, that was basically because there was not the proper hygiene between a physician going from an autopsy and delivering a baby. And they did some hand washing apparently, but they did not do enough decontamination to get rid of the particles that were attached to their fingers and stuff. And so the women were contaminated with this. But when Dr. Semmelweis published that and tried to get the medical commission or the medical practitioners to change, eventually they declared he was insane, put him in an insane asylum. He escaped, and then when he was captured, he was beaten to death. And so that was the extent that some of happened in medicine in the past. Now, that's fortunately what we're going to do to me or Tom, but it's still a concept that they don't like new ideas, and they're very resistant. And then, like so many people with so many new ideas, they resist. And then they say, well, maybe, and then they take the claim and they say, well, that's what I thought all along. That's what I've been saying. And this is kind of the same thing that's happened in medicine here. But early on in the treatment of COVID patients, there was financial incentives for hospitals to make a patient have the diagnosis of COVID when they didn't have it. They may have had they had another disease or another problem, but they were put the COVID diagnosis on. And so this started the financial returns and rewards for having that kind of a patient. And then because of the directions from several of the health agencies, patients in the hospitals were put on ventilators and used for remdesivir, the use of that. And both of those were associated with very high rates of death when they were treated that way. And as you all know, patients had family that couldn't come in to see them. They couldn't, you had to talk through a glass window, but patients were not allowed to have their family come in. And sometimes the family was able to come in and get them other kinds of treatment that did save their life. And so this whole thing of of why I mentioned that doctors and the health system have lost their faith is because so many people that I know, they know I'm a doc, they talk about this, and they're very unhappy with the way that's been done. And a lot of them are starting to realize the increased numbers of deaths of turbo cancers, of new cancers that are and accelerated cancers of patients that were in control and had no problem, but they take the vaccine or even a supplement or a booster, and then they get the cancer, and then they get all these strokes and heart attacks. And there's a young man I know that his son is about 40 or 42. He took the vaccine and he dies in his sleep at home. So anyway, there are lots of issues that we know are related to that, but it's sad for the public.
And Doc had to kind of stumble there a little bit because he started going into those areas that I'm not going to let him talk about.
I understand. I do get that, but I can say something about it because I researched it out. Remdesivir, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, was a death sentence to people, as well as the ventilators. And I'm from New York originally, so I know all of what happened through the governorship in New York State. That's another conversation, another show. I don't want to get into all of that as well, because I know you guys are still litigating all of this stuff. But I saw all of the things that we're seeing people die from. The sciences that I was reading said they would happen, and they're happening. Dr. Siler, you started writing articles, and you got yourself in trouble. Now, I want to encourage you to keep writing, okay? Because I love to write. And don't let this throw you off of that, and particularly with the wisdom that you have and the years that you bring to the table. So don't be discouraged by this. When you guys win these cases, because I believe you have some power players in front of you now, I encourage you to do that. I'd love to have you out for lunch. We could have another conversation. But for me, I'm sitting here seeing two doctors fight. Okay, no. What you guys have been accused of through the Washington Medical Commission, the very fact that they're bringing suit against you for offering a different opinion, why can't we sue them for the same thing?
You know, the answer is they have a First Amendment right to, and they can speak. And so we can't sue to shut them up, just as we're saying they can't sue to shut up these doctors. The point, the real key is you know, when there is false or misleading information, the antidote is not to censor it, but to overwhelm it with correct, to offer the better argument. And if you can offer the better argument, now you can teach people why the false and misleading is wrong. We're far better to be able to let people reason and think than to tell them what to think. You know, it used to be schools. In fact, I was just reading last night how Aristotle, he got in trouble because he taught people to think. I'm sorry, I said Aristotle, Socrates. Socrates taught people to think, and he would ask questions and he would ask questions, and he wasn't teaching them to think, to what to think. He was teaching them how to think, to critically analyze, to reason. And they got mad at him for that because they were losing control of some of the youth. Well, that's where a lot of the schools today, honestly, are going. They are not teaching critical reasoning. They're not teaching critical thinking. America was great. I mean, you think about it, we're all of a certain age. And so as we grew up, America was known for Yankee ingenuity, right? That's how we won World War II. We broke through the hedgerows because it was Yankee ingenuity that just thought, hey, wait a minute, to get through these hedgerows, hey, we used to run cows or trains across the plains that had cow catchers on there to keep the bison and the cows out of the way so they could run. What if we put a cow catcher or a snowplow on the front of a tank? Maybe we could punch through the hedgerow, and then the Germans won't be killing us in the hedgerows. I happened to interview the guy, one of the guys that helped that went through that conversation. That is Yankee ingenuity. It was seeing a problem and reasoning it and working through it. And you know, one of the real one of the real ironies here is we have a medical commission who tells us that we should follow the science. But what is the scientific method if it's not to make a proposition, test it, challenge it, find out whether it's right or wrong? And if you were right, great, challenge it again. If it was right, challenge it again until you either prove that it's right or find where it was wrong. And then you take the improved answer and you test it again and you test it again and you do it iteration after iteration until we finally get to where we think, hey, we know now that there is a femur in the upper leg. That is a guaranteed for the Homo sapien, unless there has been a birth defect or has been removed by surgery. And so what do they tell us? They say, no, you can't have that. We can't use the scientific method and let there be challenges. Well, that's what these gentlemen were doing, is they're saying, look, we have medical tests, we have medical study, we have tests. And as I apply this, I see it coming out a different way. And the medical commission says, no, don't confuse us with facts. Just take what we're telling you.
You know, as we kind of draw, we've got about 5 minutes of the show, but I want each one of the doctors to have a final statement on this, but I want to say something. I could do a whole nother show on the American Medical Association and all the things that happened in the 1920s and the 1930s about how doctors were forced to conform to a lot of the things. This is an area of study that I'm a person who, somebody said, Jeff, you know a little bit about everything. And I do. But as I go through this whole process here, there's nothing new under the sun. We're talking all the way back to Socrates or Aristotle, being persecuted for being prosecuted for having a discussion. That's not who our country was. That's not what we were. And so I like yourself, my whole world changed when a guy named Ronald Reagan took office, and I began to define how I thought in my head through the way he presented who he was. So I'm always in the common sense lane, always in the common. I had the good pleasure of speaking with Rush Limbaugh once, and he said I made his day, and unfortunately we don't have him anymore, but it was all about common sense. So Dr. Siler, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to kind of make a closing statement, if you will, please.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, enjoyed the discussion, and I'll just add a couple of things to what Dr. Eggleston said. The other thing that's changed in medicine in the last 20 years is that most practitioners are part of a large corporate organization and are given guidelines on how to treat people that they have to abide by, or they get, censored, they get dinged by their company. And there's much less diversity, I think, in the practice of medicine. And they're trying to get everybody to go down the same path. And therefore, there's less chance that individual practitioners can speak out about different ways because of that corporate structure and the top-down management. So if you work for one of those corporations, or you work in the ER or the hospital, and you speak out about something like this, you're likely to lose your job, and that's difficult for people to go through. And then the other thing I'll say is we're all people of faith, and I think our culture, you could have a whole show on this, but it's kind of moved away from truth. It's moved away from ethics. It's moved away from things like that, and that's affected the practice of medicine. And so doctors are trusted much less than they used to be after going through all this. The last thing I'll say is you can just, if you go off what Todd was saying about what the Washington Medical Commission is doing, and you go forward, if these cases are successful, you can just imagine practicing medicine in Washington State, where you're having a conversation with the patient, and you're, as a doctor or provider, you're going to be afraid to tell the patient what you really think if you have an opinion that is averse to the standard operating procedure or what your corporation or the government or somebody has told you to say. So it's going to affect the practice of medicine. It's going to affect what patients are allowed to hear when they're in the examining room with their doctor having a private conversation, or will your patient report you to the medical commission for what you said to them in that private conversation? I mean, it's going to disrupt the whole practice of medicine everywhere if this is allowed to go forward.
That's a very good point that you make, because, I'm a person of faith, and the Bible tells us that things are going to be flipped, and we're all living in that world. I've got a quick question. Somebody's asked a question of Dr. Eggleston. Did you have any input in the movie Forks Over Knives?
No. I've never been in a movie.
No, you weren't. Okay. So that's a question that's been asked to me. But Dr. Eggleston, go ahead and give us a couple minutes.
Well, what you were talking about in the 1920s or so was the Flexner report that was sponsored by Rockefeller. And
Yep.
he was realizing that there's a lot of money to be made from pharmaceuticals. And so we don't need to go into the whole thing, but that's where the basis of so much of this change in medicine has occurred.
Yeah.
And, I have to say thanks to so many people, and starting with God. I've been saved at least 10 times that I can think of in my life from dying. And I only can come to the conclusion that I was kept alive for a lot of reasons, but this being one of them, that I was supposed to write about things so that patients had a better chance and their family of getting true information and surviving some of this stuff. So I am always thankful to God for what he's done for me in my life.
Sonny, you mentioned that because I'm a cancer survivor, stage 4 squamous cell carcinoma. I had an aneurysm in 1998 that should have killed me, a car accident before that. I remember in church one day, a lady walked up to me. She said, God told me to tell you that there's going to be 3 attempts on your life. And I kind of blew her off. But that all happened. And I think, too, for such a time as this, we're having a discussion about fighting back against the things that are trying to silence us. So, Todd, you're going to close out the show, and I really, really appreciate you taking on these cases. The John Stockton thing is how I even got caught up in this. I happened to read an article, saw something online, and I kind of inquired about it, and now we're all sitting here talking about it. I'll give you the last word, sir, and thank you all for joining my program today.
Thank you.
Well, Jeff, it is an honor to be with you, and we really do appreciate. Oh, sorry about that.
He's a lawyer, you guys. He's not a camera operator. Go ahead.
We really do appreciate you taking the time to have us on and to be able to talk about this. These are very important discussions. These are discussions that I think will frame many things about liberty in America. Will we be? There we go. What are our rights going to be as we go forward? And I'll tell you, it takes men like Tom Siler and Richard Eggleston who are willing to stand up and take the slings and arrows. They're the brave ones here. It's not, I mean, you and I, Jeff, we have a lot at stake, but these are the brave men. And they are the men that it is an honor to be able to stand with. And ladies and gentlemen, as you listen to this, let me invite you to stand with them. We must stand together. Just as Ben Franklin told the founders, we must stand together or we will all hang separately. Well, we must stand together or we will lose our rights together. We have a right to have Constitution, and we have our constitutional rights that are protected. But it is only through the strength of men like these that we have that. And as we go forward and they continue the fight, Dr. Siler mentioned that his wallet's lighter. Well, I'm not free, and I can't tell you that I wish I could work free, but I can't. And Dr. Eggleston the same way. Both of these men have had to pay a lot to be able to keep things going. I contribute as much as I can to help them in their fight. But if you have an opportunity and you are willing and you want to be part of the fight, feel free to contact me. My website's really easy. Todd, Todd. My Attorney Todd is my website. My Attorney Todd. And there it is across the screen, bottom of the screen. Thank you very much, Carol. Appreciate you putting that on. Contact me. We'll let you contribute to their fight. We'll let you contribute to the fight in our federal case with John Stockton. You can contribute to them directly. I can help get you in touch with them if you want. But ladies and gentlemen, more than anything, they need to know they're not alone. This is a fight that we are all in together. And so we invite you to join us. Stand strong. Let's preserve America.
That, folks, was going to be my very last statement about this. It takes money to fight a battle like this. And I would just encourage you, those of you who watch the show, who watch the recorded version of the show, I'm going to put this all over the place and encourage other podcasters to at least inquire about putting these gentlemen in front of you. But it takes money, folks, to win these cases. It takes prayer, and it also takes perseverance. So Dr. Thomas Siler, Dr. Richard Eggleston, and of course, Todd, thank you so much for doing this. We'll be in touch. I'd love to have lunch with you, Todd Siler. So we'll connect later, okay? Folks, that's the end of my program. If you have something you want to talk about it, if you want to help sponsor the program, if you've got a commercial you want to run on it, get in touch with me. We'll talk about it, okay? Have a good afternoon. Thank you, gentlemen. Bye-bye.
Thank you.